Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. We're the show that shares inspiring stories from people all around the world to support you on your journey. Over the last week, we have ticked over 40,000 downloads of the show, which we are absolutely blown away by. Only 20% of podcasts make it through their first year, and yet 3.5 years on, we're still going strong with you, our audience, growing week on week. If this is your first time joining us, make sure you hit subscribe, and once you've listened to today's interview, if you could share the show with just one person you think would find it motivating, we would be super grateful. On to today's conversation, and in the second of a two-part special, we speak to Hugh Viney, the founder of Minerva Virtual Academy. Hugh's reflections on his experiences are captivating from the off, and we know you'll take lots of great insights from our discussion today. Through the highs, the lows, the wins and the failures, Hugh really does open the box of a founder's journey for everyone to learn from. So let's get into it and our 92nd episode of the Rogue Monkey podcast, featuring the founder of Minerva Virtual Academy, Hugh Viney. Hello, Hugh, and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Kev. Thanks for having me.
Really grateful for you sharing some time with me. We've already had one of your esteemed colleagues joining us on the show. So do you want to give us a quicker introduction as to who you are and a bit about your journey?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Hugh Viney. I'm the CEO of Minerva's Virtual Academy and Minerva Tutors. Minerva Tutors being my tutoring and homeschooling business I've run for 8 years. And 6 years ago, we started working with elite athletes, providing them with bespoke home education programs, which has been great. And we continue to work with elite athletes to this day across multiple sports, giving them flexible education around their training schedules, mainly for GCSEs and A-levels, but also for primary age children, including one swimmer who's been with us since she was 8 years old, actually. And we're hoping she makes the Olympics in France next year. 2 years ago, we founded Minerva's Virtual Academy, our second business. And this is still in education and still about flexible alternative education. But rather than being a tutoring business, providing one-on-one tutors like the first business, Minerva's Virtual Academy is an online school, a full-purpose online school. What do I mean by that? Kids get everything you would expect from a traditional good private school. Firstly, for about a quarter of the price. Fees start at $6,950 a year. But also, when I say everything you expect from a good school, I mean assemblies on Monday morning with the headmaster. I mean live lessons in small classes with fantastic teachers. I mean pastoral care, one-on-one mentorship, and I mean community. So whether that's clubs, after-school clubs, film club, art club, entrepreneurs club, whether that's meeting up once a term in London or other cities in the UK, we have a strong, brilliant, thriving community. But all of that, everything about the school is delivered online. So that's what makes us unique. And we have now nearly 300 kids from over 30 countries around the world attending the school every day. When I last checked, that was the number. But we're growing quite quickly. And 2 years ago, we had, 2 years ago at the school, there were 8 kids. And I couldn't believe their parents had taken a punt on us and sent their kids to our school when we were only 3 weeks old. But they did, and I'm so glad they did. And 2 years later, nearly 300 kids at the school. So it's a great journey in the last couple of years.
Well, there's plenty of things to dive into there. And you mentioned around having an entrepreneurs club, and you've obviously got an entrepreneurial mindset yourself. So let's cast back, let's go back a decade or so. And where did that all kind of start for you in the sense of I want to do something in this space?
Yeah, great. So 10 years ago, I was a musician. I'd quit my day job with my fellow bandmates and decided to go for it as a rock star. It didn't work out. As much as we gave it our all, I just probably simply weren't good enough, even though it was great fun. And I, looked around and I looked at myself and I thought, this is something I really want to keep trying for 5 more years. Because it's quite depressing, really, following a passion project like that and not making any money. So I needed to make some money, and I started tutoring. I would tutor for families in London, working for some of the agencies in London, which are now my competitors. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. That was the key thing for me. I found as much joy tutoring as I did playing music. So when it came to giving up on music, it was a very easy switch to become a full-time tutor. And as much as I enjoyed that, I felt after a year of doing that full-time that I can only impact 10, 15 kids a year being a tutor, providing one-on-one lessons, maybe 20 kids. But that's, I want to impact thousands of kids. So I thought the best way to do that would be to start my own tutoring business. So where I could have lots of tutors doing what I do, instead of just me running around the whole of London, zone 1 to 4, trying to tutor. And that was the beginnings of Minerva Tutors in 2014. That's why we launched Minerva Tutors, just me in a co-working space and my laptop. And about 5 tutors I'd recruited who were all my friends and started placing them with families around London. And that's kind of the beginning of the Minerva Tutors story in 2014.
So when did the idea for where it currently sits come about, and what was the transition from, I guess, a relatively small in-house operation to suddenly what has now become a global organization? What does that journey look like?
So it's a tale of 3 chapters probably. That first year was incredibly exciting. We grew quite quickly in year 1, and I hired 2 people to help run the business, the operations side and one on the marketing side. And we made money, not tons, but enough to sustain 2 members of staff, including myself, and grow the business. We had about 30 tutors working for us. It was all really exciting. And one of the key secrets to that success early on was understanding and using Google AdWords. So that was our big, 90% of our clients came from Google PPC. So we cracked that in like my second month, and never looked back really. Both businesses now highly reliant on Google AdWords. Don't tell the competition, but it's something that we cracked early on, which is quite interesting. People go about promoting their business in many ways, and I'm proud almost to say that we got Google Ads. That's something we nailed, PPC, early on, and have used ever since. Tried multiple other things and spent thousands on multiple other things, and with invariable success. Anyway, so that's the early chapter, the early days. Then I did what I think a lot of entrepreneurs are guilty of. I got completely overexcited, thought we were going to be the best best tutoring business in the world. So hired 3 people I couldn't afford and moved to very expensive offices in WeWork, Moorgate. And that was sort of beginning of 2016, and nearly bankrupted the business. Within 9 months, all the money had gone. We were staring down the barrel of a gun. I just spent money on people I couldn't afford, and I spent money on offices we couldn't afford. So just before going bust, I had to let a few people go, understandably, and move to a very cheap and shabby office. And we never looked back, really. And I'm really glad I learned that lesson in year 2. And now in year 9, never touch wood, but we'll never get to that point again, because I know there's the warning signs, not because I'm arrogant that we're going to always be successful, far from it. But I know how to flatline, and I know how to stabilize, as it were. I know how to stop sinking now. And I think that's a really important skill. I know how to stop a sinking ship rather than let it go. And that was all from that year 2 period. So then it was that year, 3 years of consolidation. We created a really happy, thriving tutoring business in London, gaining a really good reputation as being friendly, and tutors that were great at mentoring, boosting confidence rather than being exams focused. At the time, the Good Schools Guide gave us a review calling us the innocent drinks of the tutoring world, one of the best PR headlines I've ever received. And that was a really nice period. So there's 17 to 19, where you got to a point when you have 6 employees, thriving tutor community, about 50, 60 tutors, and a happy business. A business that wasn't growing much, but it was profitable and happy and doing a good service, all in the build up to COVID, where obviously things changed. Is this narrative all right so far? Can I sort of bring you through the years?
I have to pick up on something before it goes out.
Yeah, okay, go.
Before you mentioned innocent, you were talking about the lessons you had early on. I listened to an interview with Richard Reed, who's one of the founders of Innocent.
Yep.
And he talked about some of those early years when they had nothing,
Yep.
like absolutely nothing. And he says, I remember getting to almost weeks from it all being done and one person kind of supporting us. And he said, I'm really glad I had that experience, because you wouldn't have heard of Innocent if we hadn't have gone through that journey. And then you mentioned Innocent. So yeah, I think we're definitely on the same wavelength there.
Funnily enough, I'm big fans of this. There were 3 founders, weren't there? And I saw one speak at a festival once. He was brilliant. And he was talking about the acquisition by Coca-Cola, and which obviously was significant in their journey. I think it's something like Coke bought them for 150 million and the 3 founders got 50 million each, or something brilliant like that. And then the 2 of them left and one stayed to help with the transition with Coke. And he was the one that I heard speak, and I thought he was amazing and really inspiring. And he said they got a lot of stick for selling out to Coke. And he said, well, we want to be the biggest smoothie in the world. We're not going to do that unless we partner with someone like Coke, unless we merge with someone like Coke. And it was a really good way of showing that these business owners aren't sellouts. They're just trying to reach more people and think of the best way they possibly can. And I've got a bit of an interest in it too, because before the music days, I worked in food and drink. I was one of the first sales teams that introduced coconut water to London. So Vita Coco, which everyone drinks now. I used to do door-to-door selling of that, cafe to cafe in the cold. Italian deli owners just chasing me off saying, why would I want to sell coconut water in the middle of the winter? And and it was only when Rihanna started promoting it that we could point to posters and say, Rihanna's on the tube drinking it, and then they started taking interest. But anyway, that's another story. And I think that background for me was so crucial too. Learning how to do sales is one of the most vital skills for running a business. So pre-music, learning how to sell coconut water in the snow was a great training ground for learning how to sell anything. Anyway, but I love the Innocent story. It's hugely inspirational, and yeah, it was cool being referred to as the innocent drinks of the tutoring world in those middle years I was talking about, when we had a really nice business going. Really good PR hack. I'm really happy to share this finally with people. That line, the innocent drinks of the tutoring world, which they said at the end of the article, the big review. And the review happened like this. They interview loads of parents. They interview loads of tutors. They interview me extensively, and they put this big thing together, which is the review, like they do with any school or tutoring business. And it's really important to get these reviews from the Good Schools Guide. It's like the main reviewer of schools and tutoring companies. And right at the end, she sort of described us to me in our interview. And I had this line saved. I thought maybe she'll use it, maybe she won't. And I said to her right at the end, it's almost like we're the innocent drinks of the tutoring world. And she went, I like that. And bang, that's the line they use. That's the headline they use. And I fed that to her. So anyone ever want to create a headline from some sort of PR interview, just give them it. 9 times out of 10, the journalists will think that's great and just use it. So we had that on the front and center of our website for the next 5 years or whatever it was. So, or 4 years. And that was because I made it up, which is brilliant. So interesting to know. So back to the journey, COVID hits, and that affects us all. All my friends were sort of like, oh, isn't tutoring doing amazingly in COVID? And it wasn't the case. Cheap tutoring did well, sort of £30 an hour stuff where you could just book a tutor online, but consultative, bespoke tuition, the kind that we deliver with highly trained, highly experienced tutors, where the parents speak to our we have a client manager team in the office which looks after the job and looks after the parent, looks after the well-being of the pupil in a team with the tutor. That sort of tuition, we all took a hit. COVID was just tough. Also, we ran summer camps every year. That obviously went down the drain in COVID. But, our homeschooling business and tutoring business was stable. And it was then coming out of COVID, the end of it in 2020. And when I rewind a bit, so as I mentioned previously, homeschooling was a big part of Minerva Tutors. And up until that point, for about 3-4 years, we've been delivering bespoke homeschooling programs to families that wanted an alternative to education, including, of course, athletes. So the main two types of families we had getting homeschooling from us were elite athletes in lots of sports who wanted a bespoke education to fit around their training and match day schedules, and children with mental health needs. And this was great. It was a growing part of our business, 2017 to 2020, fastest growing part of our business. But it's expensive. If you hire tutors to deliver homeschooling, it's expensive. And we were getting this great reputation on Google. Our SEO was fantastic. You just type in homeschooling UK and we'd be on page 1, getting all these phone calls and inquiries because we had a reputation for delivering high quality homeschooling. But about 95% of the families calling us could not afford it. That high, 95%. And when COVID hit, the calls got worse, better. I mean, worse because they still couldn't afford it, but the phone was off the hook. Families in COVID decided, wow, homeschooling's great. I love homeschooling. My kid's happy. The first time I've seen them happy in years. Don't get me wrong. Most families hated homeschooling, and rightly. Like, the kids needed to be at school. But about 20% of families, the kids thrived in the home learning environment. It was because it suits them. Online learning and home learning and remote learning suits about 20% of kids. It's better for them, better suited to them than normal school, traditional school, which unfortunately every child is forced to do the same type of school. And it has been the same for 200 years. So in COVID, our phone was off the hook even more because all these families had discovered homeschooling, discovered how great it was, and wanted more of it. But unfortunately, the same problem was there. We're expensive. One-on-one tutoring for homeschooling is expensive, tens of thousands of pounds a year, like private school fees. So I thought, let's build an affordable homeschooling solution. And so we put together the plan for Minerva's Virtual Academy, the second business, which is, it's an online school in the way I described earlier, a full purpose independent school, just delivered online, except which caters for children who want to learn from home or thrive in a home learning environment. But it's much cheaper than one-on-one tuition. Like I said, we call it affordable private school. Obviously, nearly £7,000 a year is not affordable to lots of people. I don't mean that, but it certainly is more affordable than private school fees. And we attract lots of families who send their children to state schools normally, but they see that price range as attainable and affordable. So that was the reason, that was behind it. We wanted to help more homeschooling families. So we created an affordable homeschooling solution, and lo and behold, sort of tech enabled, much more scalable business actually. And that's why it's been able to really scale up in 2 years to, like I said, nearly 300 kids at the school full time, with us. So, then the last 2 years have been a kind of whirlwind with both businesses, and, the second business has now grown to 50 staff on payroll, 20 freelancers, and in 2 years. And that's had a knock-on effect for the first business, which is also growing again now, because they help each other out. And it's quite interesting. It's its own story I'd like to tell one day, maybe. We can touch on it a bit now, but the sister companies helping each other out is really interesting. They cross-refer multiple kind of, what one sends the other business, the other sends the other. But also from a team perspective, they can help each other out on certain projects. Lots of the work Fab does, for example, Fabian, our elite athlete education officer, who you interviewed separately, he'll find athletes that are suitable for the school or they're suitable for the tutoring business. Because, the other key thing we talk about athletes is with Minerva's Virtual Academy, now 10% of the kids at the school, so nearly 30 kids at the school, are elite athletes. Parents don't necessarily want to pay the tens of thousands for the bespoke one-on-one, but they can afford the £7,000 a year to send their kids to get a proper education, get their GCSEs and A-levels, but ultimately fit their school around their training structure. So, and we'll continue to grow our space in the elite athlete world. It's something we love doing.
So I'm curious, because having gone through the period that you went through with the first business where things started to move forwards and you took that big leap into the unknown, if you like, and as you said, it was quite a challenging period. As you've now had this explosion with the academy, what are your safety mechanisms, or what's the parachute ripcord that you're pulling to make sure that it still stays true and sustainable moving forwards?
all the lessons learned from the first business, like from day one, I've been on the business, not in the business. Meaning I'm not involved in the day-to-day running of the school whatsoever. I hired a headmaster to do that, since hired deputy heads to support him, who've then got heads of year to support them, and who then have all the teachers, about 25 teachers. So that was those structures, not that amount of staff, but those structures have been there from day one. And then the amount of staff have grown into that structure. I'm not saying it's been easier by any stretch, but there's one example of being able to learn from lessons of previous business is hiring great people and building HR structures from day one and delegating from day one. So my time is properly used and managed. And that's just the school side of Minerva's Virtual Academy. There's obviously the head office side, which is the marketing team, the admissions team, sales team, ops, and finance. Again, from day one, I didn't get stuck in any of those departments like most founders would, like I did in my first business. I hired properly from day one and delegated out those department structures, which started off with one person doing 2 of the jobs, yes, or one person doing 3, or but have now grown into fully fledged departments within the business. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but it will. From day one with those structures in place, it means we've got the vision ahead for the next 6 months at least, vision for the next 2 years of where we want to grow, but at least 6 months of being able to cater for any issues that might happen, any growth that might slow down. We're sort of protected by finance being healthy and by great team members. So I've managed things sensibly in that regard. So there's always a big buffer, a temporal buffer for any signs that things, if they do slow down or start to go wrong, we can react quickly without it becoming a disaster.
I remember listening to an interview recently with Richard Branson on the Diary of a CEO, and he said it wasn't until I was in charge of multiple businesses within the Virgin Group that the head of finance said to me, "You don't understand net and gross, do you?"
I've heard this.
And he went, "But that's what you're here for."
Yeah.
And it was his head of finance that he said that to. And I do think it's a real challenge, because when you're in startup mode, if you like, regardless of what industry you're in, you are every department in one. And then you have to have almost those moments where you get a bit burned to actually learn moving forwards. We need to make sure we've got X, Y, and Z. And it's almost like, I think some people want to skip some of those lessons, but I do think part of the founder and the development journey of any business is you're getting it wrong, because you'll learn more from that. And actually your growth moving forwards is a culmination of all the failures, which is why you have the success, as opposed to people just want to get straight to the success without experiencing that pain.
100%. And definitely the second business has hugely benefited from failures in the first business. It's just great. And it's just almost like a lesson in, if your business is going all right, but not doing what you quite want it to be, start a new business. and one that can complement the first business. And I'm not saying it's easy. But there's something to be said for it, because you don't have to stay stuck where you are trying to make the business you're in better. Starting a new business, which helps them work together, is one way to create growth. Anyway, as I've shown as an example, but it's not a magic wand, I know. The other thing that you just touched on, which I find fascinating, and I can hand on heart say I am good at, because lots of things I'm not good at, and I've had to learn, is that delegation piece. So you're right. The CEO is at every department when you start out. And what I did with the second business was be a none. I was just the CEO and had people running all the other departments. So having that from day one created a really good mindset for everyone involved, but also a template for how we're going to run things. And then, but it's the best lesson is one above that is when you do that, you've got to let the people you've appointed as senior leaders fail and mess up. I keep nearly swearing. Is this a non-swear podcast? I just want to check.
It's okay. I just have to put a little tap on the bottom that says contains explicit.
I keep nearly swearing and then just checking myself. letting senior leaders mess up is crucial too. It's so painful when it first happens because you're like, I could have just done that differently and better. Or if you're a control freak, which I'm not, luckily, that's a good skill to have. You can't deal with that idea that you've delegated a task, they've done it worse than you, and potentially, even worse than that, it's caused problems. But if you let them do that once or twice, then they won't do it again. And then suddenly you're in a position where you've got full delegation and a functioning senior leadership team. The next trick, one above that, is teaching those senior leaders how to do that for the people below them. And that is tough because some of my best team, out of the 50 on the payroll these days, 7 senior leaders or 6 or something, whatever. And nearly all of them struggle with delegation, really struggle. Because I think people do. And it's really hard for them to grow their teams if they're constantly trying to manage or control or do everything themselves. Some it might be man management, micromanagement. Some it might be, others it might be the opposite. They just try to do it all themselves. So they're just like, leave it to me. And so that's my next trick for growth, is trying to teach senior leaders how to be able to delegate. Because I think that's an obvious route for growth. As a route to grow. There's many other things, obviously, you need to grow, but I think that's one that I'd like to work on because it makes you a better person too, I think, if you can trust others.
Well, you just mentioned there about the person, and I think I can only speak for myself here, but I find some of those lessons and experiences, you become more conscious of the impacts on you as a person, not just a business, as you get older. I think of, running in like a bull in a china shop at the age of 25 when I was heading into the sales world. And I look now and actually go, can probably do it a slightly different way, because actually as you get older and your friends, you'll get married, you have kids, all of those sorts of things start going on around you. Your view on the world changes a little bit. And I think, there has been this conversation, and we've touched on it already, around, mental health and people that are struggling, especially off the back of the pandemic. And I think actually as a leader or being in a senior role, as you get more comfortable in the fact that actually you need to be looking after yourself and being the best that you can be to support others, part of that includes offloading some roles and tasks and stress, because if you don't, it's going to come crashing down eventually.
Exactly. Personally, one of the biggest struggles I have with which affects my mental health the most is HR. It's not sales, it's not marketing, it's not ops, it's not finance, it's HR. I've tried to be all like, get over it, grow up, deal with it better. But I've actually just started to accept it. It's my weak spot. Like I get stressed when people are unhappy. I don't deal with that well internally. I actually might deal with it quite well now externally and with processes in place and supporting, but internally it kind of messes me up if people are struggling or people have an HR issue. Without going into too much detail, basically, it's the one thing that really gets me. Now, a lot of founders I speak to have similar issues, and their worst part of running a business is HR. But with that in mind, and because it was affecting me, and this is brilliant, it's just quite interesting to share, that because it was affecting me so much, I was like, right, well, you're not getting better at dealing with it. You got to fix it in a different way. And December last year, I hired a chief of staff, which is like a super EA. And I'm like, I'm outsourcing HR, not proper HR stuff is dealt with by our head of ops and HR, but I'm outsourcing my capacity to deal with HR stuff as a CEO to you. And she's like, yeah, great. Because she doesn't care emotionally. She's tough. And it doesn't get affected by it like me. And bang, everyone gets supported in the way they should, because my chief of staff is an extension of me. She is there to be in places I can't be. She speaks on my behalf, so she can give them the support they need and more than me. And she takes a load of my struggling mental capacity for that sort of stuff onto her shoulders, and it frees me up. So that was only something I did in December, and it's already working amazingly. And I think answers a couple of your points. As one example, I mean, I could talk about HR for days. But I realized there was an overload of how I was dealing with something, and the best way to deal with it was to share it. And I needed a new person to come help me with that. She's helping me with lots of other things for growing the business. But that was one main one, and it's really working. And everyone wins. Like the senior leaders win because they get more of me, even though it's not me, or they get support they might need. And then I win because it's not affecting me mentally, therefore stopping me from focusing on other things, which we need to grow.
Yeah, and I think there's something in that around, if you think of it as like whether it's a pie chart of dividing up your time and mental energy and emotional energy, and actually going, what are my unique things that have allowed us as a business and an organization to get to this point? And actually, I found it in the early days of working with AP, we were everything in a couple of people, which was fine. But in the last, say, 6 months, having people doing more support on things like social media and things like that, like that isn't unique to me. My skill set does not lie around social media. So having someone backing me up doing that means that then my specialities, if you like, can then be exploited more for the benefit of the business and the wider organization. And I think within it, especially as a leader, knowing that you're getting the best parts of somebody coming to the table, instead of like part of their mind, their attention and their energy being sapped because of something that isn't unique, cannot be uniquely solved by them. And I've heard people in Formula One teams talk about that. Some of the big tech startups in America are going, what do I actually bring to the table? And kind of like mentioned with Richard Branson earlier, he's the ideas guy. He employs other people to do the other bits, but that's the bit 100%. He does of going, I can take a concept to reality and make it something around the world, but I need help in doing that. And I think we're not good at asking for help. And I think, again, it's something that I guess comes with age, is perhaps our egos rescind a little bit and we become more comfortable in who we are and what we're not good at. But I think it's a really interesting area to delve into.
Yeah, agreed. And the age thing's really interesting. Like the first 6 years of my businesses, but it was only one business at the time. The first 6 years were those mid 20s to 30. And I talked about the journey earlier. And I used to think I would encourage anyone to be an entrepreneur early. Because when I had the idea at 25, everyone, all friends, family, you'll hear this quite a lot, I think. But friends, family, like, don't do that. Don't start a business. Go work in the real world. You've just tried to be a musician for 3 years. Like, get a real job. And when you're 30, start your business. And everyone said it to me. And that's fair enough. Like, it's a kind of 90% of people are averse to risk. Maybe 80% are averse to risk. There's stats showing that stuff. And I was like, I don't mind taking risks at all. It's fine. I'm very comfortable with it. But and so I was really glad I ignored that advice. Really glad I started my business. And I used to think in my late 20s, Christ, everyone should do this younger because you've got more energy and no kids. So like you should really try. Because I was so full of energy. You couldn't stop me, when not meaning I worked really late hours, which I've always been relatively good at, is finishing work by 6 and stuff like that. If I need to work extra hard, I'll start really early. I'll start sort of 5 a.m. But I'm very good at sort of stopping by 6 or 5:36. It wasn't that I was just burning myself out with hours. My energy was in the networking, getting myself out there, going to meet people, going to networking events, going to festivals, parties, all related to work, I mean. And I remember thinking, Christ, I'm so glad I'm doing this now before kids and when I'm in my 20s because I've got so much energy. But that was when I had a sort of a business that was doing all right, but not really growing and was small, profitable, quite easy to manage. The joke is now with my new business, which is scaled in the way I've described, that's all been since I had a baby. So I've done these last two my baby's 18 months. My daughter Violet is 18 months old. So she's just about the same age as the second business. And like the latter part of pregnancy and then the 18 months of her life is like the age of my second business. And she's the age of when my businesses went crazy, So I've had to do all these extra things and I have had to work harder. I've had to work longer hours. I've had more stress, mainly to do with having growing staff numbers. HR again, all of that while having a baby. And so my younger self being smug about that, thinking I'm getting it all out of the way now, was wrong. I mean, I've had more success since having a child. And I think that leads back to what you mature and you work out what's important and you're better at dividing up your time. And that's what I've become, a bit more efficient with everything I do. Because not only do I have a baby that's not a great sleeper. I don't know if you have any children, but it's about 50-50 in my friendship groups. 50% of my friends have babies that sleep, 50% of babies that don't. And we're in the don't category, I'm afraid. But when you're faced with a challenge like that at home, well, it's not a challenge because it's all a joy. But when you throw in challenges of fatherhood, it makes you make smarter decisions about your time, which ultimately have helped me run a better business, run both businesses better. So now I'm like, no, have kids early, guys. Have a kid early. Have a kid in your 20s and then start a business. No, I don't advocate that. I mean, actually, I don't not advocate that. I changed my mind on that. If someone was thinking about it, I'd say it doesn't matter. Having a baby might even help. You know, I'm not saying it does, but I've definitely changed my mind on the idea that being young and having more energy will help you be more successful. I'm sure in some cases it will, but I'm a sort of living example of having a baby that struggles with sleep. But it's wonderful. Has actually helped my businesses. So I don't know.
I think, well, I don't know about you, but you mentioned there about prioritizing time. And I think you also, some of the niceties drop away. And I don't mean we become rude, but you become a lot clearer as to what is actually important in both your working life and your wider life. So there are certain things that you kind of do, but you don't need to do it. I listened to an interview of Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you listened to any of his stuff, but he talks a lot about like kind of, you know, ask yourself the question, if you only have 1 hour a week to work on your business, what would you do? And then suddenly you're in parenthood and, you know, I've got nieces and nephews that I know have had challenging experiences with their respective parents. And I think it's, you see them and you think, how are you getting all these things done on top of the fact you're now only getting 4 hours sleep a night or whatever?
Exactly.
And the answer usually is you just got to do it. And I think it almost, you know, in a strange way, it almost backs you into a corner to really figure out what you do need to focus on. Because if you've only got a certain amount of time and mental energy because you're so exhausted, you will focus on the absolute things that matter and nothing else.
Exactly. And that's certainly what's happened. That's certainly what's happened. It keeps you focused as well. And also something, it makes you focus long-term on the goals, right? As well. If you've got a family, you're less selfish. Not that I was particularly selfish in my 20s, and I've been with my wife, you know, for like 10 years, but like both as girlfriend and wife, but the baby thing, it doesn't just focus your day to day, which we've just touched on, but focuses your absolute goals. You know, what are we trying to get to in 3 years? Where do I want to be to help with my family in 3 years? Maybe 5, maybe 10. I don't like to think that far ahead though. And it focused that. Honestly, having a young family helps that too. So it doesn't just help with day-to-day management of tasks, day-to-day management of your time, which it does, as the reasons that I've explained. I think it helps with the absolute focus of goals for the next year, 2 years and 3 years.
Well, let's talk about looking forwards then, because I remember the first time speaking to Fab about like what you guys were doing and hearing about it and thinking this is awesome. And it's been a real joy to explore obviously where you're up to now, because it is awesome. But knowing how far you've come to get to here, when you're looking forwards, what's the stuff that's exciting you and kind of where do you see it heading?
Yeah, I think, so yeah, we can break things pretty sort of simply down with the school. We've currently got nearly 300 kids at the school. Across 30 countries around the world. And, you know, I want to see 1,000 at the school by the end of 2024 from 50 countries around the world. And with that, I think take stock and decide, well, can we actually get 20,000 kids with our model? Yeah, I think we could. But I don't want to think that far ahead yet. I want to get to 1,000 first. And within that, we are still, within 1,000, we are still supporting the 5 key types of children that need us the most, that traditional school does not suit. Children with mental health issues that need additional mental health support, which make up a chunk of the kids at our school. Children with special educational needs, the elite athletes and performers, which we've touched on, the super intelligent kids that are sort of 12 years old that want to get 3 A levels out of the way. We're perfect for them. And finally, the more growing piece, and this is probably where we'll get the growth to 10,000 rather than 1,000, is the families that just choose us because they think it's cool and better than normal school, like traditional school, which might seem bonkers to some people, but that is the growing segment of online schoolers. Families who've actually said, well, why does school have to be the same it's been since the Victorian times? 30 kids in a class facing the front, getting a lecture on a whiteboard. How is it not changed in that long? Is there another way? There's actually a few other ways. We are one of them. Flexible online schooling, meaning you could be anywhere in the world. These are families that travel the world, or families who just do cool stuff. And these are families that realize online schooling doesn't mean you're on your computer all day. It doesn't at all. Online schooling means you learn really efficiently, like way more efficiently than traditional school. So, about 3 times more efficiently. So you don't need to go to 6 hours of lessons a day. You just need to do 4 hours of learning a day. And that might be a couple of live lessons and then a couple of hours learning on the platform on your own. Suddenly your day's freed up. And you're at the same level as kids at traditional school, same grade, but you're doing 4 hours a day of lessons. Then you go outside and play, or you go outside and explore, or you go to your local club up the road, or you do something cool. Yes, obviously kids at our school, who are elite esport athletes might go back on the computer and game. Sure. But what a lot of lifestyle families, the growing segment of our types of families enjoy online schooling, this is the exciting futuristic stuff. They're just going, this is just cooler and more efficient than traditional school. I'm not saying it should replace traditional school at all. It will remain the best form of education for a minority of kids, right? As it stands, 80% of kids should go to traditional school. It's the best place for them. But for 20% of kids, which I think is a significant minority, a very significant minority, traditional school is really, really sucks for them. It makes them sad. It makes them depressed. It makes them anxious. It makes them, it's a place that they feel distracted, a place they feel they can't learn, where an online schooling is the best option. So that's what I'm saying. And I think that may grow to about 30%, but it will never replace physical. It shouldn't. I couldn't have gone to online school. I loved school, traditional school. It suited me down to a T. But one of the reasons I started MBA is because after 6 years of running Minerva Tutors, it was so apparent that lots of kids were not like me. I have fond memories of school and loved school. Lots of kids, lots hate school because it doesn't suit them. That style of learning does not suit them. And that was a real awakening. Wow. Okay. Those kids are so sad about school. Wow. Okay. There's got to be other options. And MVA, Minerva's Virtual Academy, is one of those options, where kids who have suffered for 4 years at school, 5 years at their traditional school, they come to MVA and they're happy for the first time in years. If they're happy, their mum's happy and their dad. And I guess if we get to 1,000 kids, we're just making 1,000 kids happy, and then we'll decide about where we can take this. But it could easily, the way the model works, it could be 10, 20,000, be 100,000, but one step at a time. I think getting to 1,000 would be a massive landmark for us. And that's something for aiming for end of 2024, beginning of 25.
Awesome. I'll have to hook you up with a guy called Matt, who's based out in Australia, and they've got a very niche school out there, although it's face-to-face and in a very niche environment on the Gold Coast of Australia. But they found with a lot of Surfing Academy students that they weren't fitting into the traditional school model.
Wicked, yes.
And I think it's only A levels, but I think there's a state requirement there that they sit English and maths. So all they do is 2 hours a day of English and maths, and then all they do is specifically focused on what their career is building towards. So they'll go surfing before school. They'll spend the afternoon learning about like media and marketing, like the kind of things that actually, if you want to go on to be a professional surfer or work in the industry. And so it's a very niche school, but I think, like you say, there is a growing sector of parents. And to be honest, I'm not a parent yet, but I'm already thinking
choice.
Choice, but also think of like the working population out there, shall we say, certainly over the last 3 years, have all been shown work can be done in a different way. And a lot of businesses have taken maybe a 25-year leap in less than 3 years because of the pandemic, in terms of, do we need office space? Can we work remotely? All these sorts of things. And I think, well, people are going, well, why should that be limited to business? Why? Because ultimately, if it's making me a happier employee because I'm not commuting for 10 hours a week, then funnily enough, if that might apply before the age of 18, that doesn't suddenly just kick in when you're an adult.
100%. That's a really good argument, which we don't use enough. It's more the argument people who are not in our sector see, and it's a really good one. Like the world of work's changed so dramatically. What that would make sense that education would, right? The way we go to work has changed. So why can't the way we go to school change, or at least have way more options? The other thing that you touched on is, obviously we're a private school and we get to 1,000 kids as a private school. But I think if we could, one of the things I'm trying to work with the government now, we've got nowhere yet, but we're trying to lobby the government is state online schools. Because that's when you're going to see tens of thousands of kids not having to go to their school down the road, which doesn't suit them. They can come to the online school, which is state funded. And that's good for 2 reasons. So 3, the ones we just discussed, so it's just better sometimes to have choice. There's core reasons. It's cheaper for the government to run. So the government's going to save loads of money rather than like having physical schools or making new physical schools. But finally, and this is the most important one, we haven't really touched on this, and this is why online schools need to happen, is last year in the UK, 1.7 million kids were missing school. 1.7 million. And the majority of that 1.7 million, that's a lot of kids, were just consistently absent from school. And the main 2 reasons were for mental health issues and for severe special educational needs, which their traditional schools couldn't cater for. So that many kids are missing school, and the government's saying they should be in traditional school, do what you can to get them back in. Well, actually, no. If there was a good online schools provided by the government, these kids they wouldn't have to miss any school. They could go to school every day. It would be online. And the government needs to realize that doesn't mean it's crap. And even if you don't believe in all the things I've said earlier about why it's good and why it works, it's better they're doing that than just not any school at all. So this is the slightly bigger picture, though. What we've created is a really cool business. It's growing fast, but essentially a private online school, which we're incredibly proud of. But if we get this right, we can scale with government partnerships and things like that. You can scale this to hundreds of thousands of kids that really need it and solve real big problems. But we'll see. That's just in a couple of years' time, we'll start thinking about things like that, I think.
I remember, I think it was at last year's TED conference. Somebody got Elon Musk up on stage and they asked him about this Starship that he's building to go to Mars. And he said, yeah, we'll need about 1,000 to get the kind of people to Mars to create a sustainable setup there. And you could see everyone in the room going, what are you talking about? And I would be reasonably confident within 25 years, some of the things he's got ambitions for and these grand ambitions will materialize. And I think many people are cynical. And I'm sure if I would have said in 2015, you'll have £100 contactless limit on your phone and you won't even leave your house with your wallet and you'll be able to work 4 out of 5 days a week without even leaving a house. I think a lot of people would laugh me out the door.
Yeah.
And in fairness, I was leading a coaching conference 3 weeks before the pandemic, and I stood up in front of 150 coaches. And we were at that point a month out from Olympic trials. And if I'd have told them what was coming, I would have been laughed off stage. And I think at some point, people do need to get on board with what's coming in the future. And like you said, it's not a small problem. Over 1 million young people, and that's just in this country.
Just in this country. That's huge.
But, that's advanced. But the other thing is that they're the next generation, if that makes sense. So they're going to be the next generation of tutors, police officers, whoever it is. Like all of these sectors are fed by the current crop of students. So if 1 million people, they are 1 million future workforce that are currently not attending school. So I think there's some huge discussions there. So I've got one more thing I want to ask, and from a reflective point of view, I know obviously we can't travel back in time, but let's think out there for the young entrepreneurs who are also called Hugh, and they're going through their sales journey in their 20s, which, you find a lot of people that can't quite figure out their path end up in roles perhaps similar to that.
Yeah.
And they're looking forwards going, I could really use with some advice. What would you say to those people?
So much advice. One I always go back to, because I did it and it worked, is don't wait for something to be perfect before you do it. So and don't think about something for too long before you do it. Just get going with, even if it's half an idea, get going with it rather than sitting on it and making it right in the planning stages, because you're going to change your ideas anyway. Your goals aren't going to be hit anyway, but it's the doing and the action which is more important than the planning and the thinking. And so many people who aren't natural entrepreneurs, I think, get stuck in perfection, trying to perfect an idea before getting it out there. And linking that back to sales, that's obviously intrinsically linked to sales. Just get selling. Like, I'll give you a really good example for that in a business sense. With the school, so 2 years ago when we launched the online school, about 10 other people had the same idea. Obviously, it's like don't get me wrong, there's about 4 or 5 existing online schools where we've come in and taken them on, and they're great and they're established. But around the same time we launched MVA, there was a group of entrepreneurs or people in online schooling or whatever, or schools who wanted to create online versions of themselves. Anyway, a dozen other people tried to launch. I've launched online schools in that time. And the majority of them focused on their product only and their tech. To just raise loads of money or invested loads of money and time in building the perfect online school in their head. What does that look like? We put all our money into sales and marketing and improved the product as the pupil numbers grew. So I think that's the best example to show. So we got going. We've got about 5-6 times more pupils than those other schools, which means, what does that mean? Obvious things: 5-6 times more revenue, 5-6 times more excitement, blah, 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 whatever. And it's because we focus on marketing and sales rather than the product first. And because you can always refine the product, but it's important to start selling as soon as you can, because then you get proof of concept, you get revenue, all those sorts of things. But that's a real macro version example, real life of I applied my just get going philosophy, because it worked for us really well. But now in year 3, by the end, we have the growth, the money, the proof of concept to heavily invest in our product. And we're going to have the best product now as well. So not only the people numbers, but we're going to have by the end of this year, the best product out there because we got the time and money to invest in it. So that's bit of advice I'd always give.
Fantastic. Well, it's been really interesting over the last hour or so exploring all of this. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who I've got probably follow-up questions. So we'll make sure we link everything that both you and Minerva are up to in the comments below. But I think it's a really exciting journey. I don't feel like this is the end of this conversation. I feel like it would be really interesting to revisit this in, say, 2025 and find out how 23 and 24 went for you, because you've got these goals and ambitions, and hey, it's exciting.
There's the test. Okay. I wish we'd had one in 2020, because then I could really. So this one would be, I've met those goals, but this puts me under pressure to hit them now by 2025. But that's no bad thing. Pressure is a good thing. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well, we're just really grateful for both yourself and the rest of the team, obviously, just sharing the story, because I think it's such a fascinating area that I think a lot more people will empathise with now, having experienced it probably in their working lives over the last few years. And for those people with kids out there as well, going through the school system right now, like you said, that choice and different ways of doing things is something that I think is only going to get more and more popular. So just a huge thank you for sharing your time with us.
Pleasure, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me
on. Thanks again to Hugh there for sharing his awesome story. You can find out more about Minerva Virtual Academy through the links in the show notes. Make sure you're following us across the socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, as well as LinkedIn. So just search for the Rogue Monkey Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great week, whatever you're up to, and thank you so much again for being part of the Rogue Monkey Podcast community.